Hi everyone, this is Karen Hooley and welcome to this week's version of Crochet Coffee and Chat with Karen. Hi Linda, I see you're out there, you and Brat both. I'm glad you're here. If you're just joining me after the fact, I want to make sure that you know to subscribe to my channel so that you can get notified when I go live on YouTube. I do this every week on Wednesday at 9 a.m. from 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific time. So if you're in the Eastern time zone, that would be noon. And I'll put in the show notes at the bottom of this video a time zone calculator so that if you live anywhere else, you can figure out what time that is. Hi, Dawn. I'm glad you're here. And Juanita too, yay! I'm so glad you guys are here. Today is going to be a little different than normal. I definitely want you guys to chime in because I'm going to be talking about some things I've been going over my survey that I sent out to my newsletter subscribers back in August. I think it was August. It was either late July or early August. And I haven't, again, there's so much information on there. I haven't been able to really consolidate it all and figure out where everybody is. But the one thing that just kind of really made me wonder is I had on there a question about what level crocheter you are. And a lot of people did the basics, you know, beginner, intermediate, advanced, professional. I consider professional advanced kind of the same thing. Hi, Martha. Awesome. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're listening, but drive safely to work. But a lot of people in my survey, they did this interesting thing where they, instead of putting one of those answers, I left it open-ended on purpose because I wanted to see what people thought. And a lot of people did things like, I consider myself intermediate, but there's a lot of things I'm a beginner. Or I'm a beginner, but I'm getting, you know, I've done this and this and this, so I'm not quite sure if I should be an intermediate. Or people are putting themselves in intermediate, and then based on the questions that they answered, they should really be advanced. So what I did was with everybody who put beginner, intermediate, and advanced, I left them where they were. But the people who were like waffling, what I did was I changed their answer to give me a better idea of where people think they are. And usually one of the interesting things I notice about people is that the first thing that they say is what they really think. And then they qualify why they think that. So what I did was if someone said, I'm a beginner, but I think I might be close to intermediate, I put them in the beginner part. Or I'm intermediate, but I'm almost there at advanced. Or I'm in the intermediate, but I don't know if I really should be an intermediate. You know, that kind of thing. So just to clarify where everybody was. So I was able to, by doing that, I was able to make a chart of what everybody is. And I wanted to show you guys this. And I wanted to talk to you guys about what each one of these levels actually means and why I think crocheters really underrate themselves and why you really shouldn't, what's the word I want? You really shouldn't think that like on a pattern, if it says it's an intermediate pattern, but you think you're a beginner, you shouldn't shy away from being able to even start that pattern. So let's talk about this chart here really quick for a second. I noticed that there's a few more people popping in. No one's in the live chat. If you're here and you're watching, just say hello and introduce yourself if you've never been here before, and let me know kind of where you're from. I know a few people have chimed in, and I'm so glad you guys did. Okay, so I'm gonna put this down here. So I had 100 people who actually filled out the survey. My email list is like 10, 15 times that many people, but only 100 of you guys actually responded, which I thought was interesting because usually it's a lot more. So, but in that group of 100 people, 3 people said they were beginners. 42 said they're advanced crocheters. And 55%, which is the big one, said intermediate. Okay. Which, you know, is probably, because of the type of patterns I design, is probably pretty close to where everybody is. But I really think that a lot of these intermediate people are really advanced, or these intermediate people could do advanced patterns if they would just take a moment to try it out. So what I want to do first is the Crafty Art Council. I don't know if you've ever been to their website or know who they are, but the Crafty Art Council is an organization that is led by most of the, well, there's other yarn companies too, but mostly the box store yarns. So like Red Heart, Lion Brand, Yarnspirations, you know, Karen Yarns. Yarnspirations is a lot of different brands, but those yarns. I don't know if Hobby Lobby and Joann's and Michael's are included in there. I know they do a lot with them, but basically what they've done is they've created kind of some standards for the industry, and there's a lot of pros and cons about, you know, what their definitions of, you know, the yarn weights, or there's a lot of simplicity in their garment sizing kinds of things. So there's, you know, in the professional world, there's a lot of people who say, oh yeah, use those. And then there's a lot of people who say, oh no, you need to find this book or that book, or you need to create your own, which I've done. I've kind of created my own standards for how I write patterns as far as grading sizes and things that I think is a little closer, because I've got more detail than what Crafty Art Council does. The one thing that I think everybody can agree on is what they consider all the levels of patterns to be. And so I want to talk about, they have four levels: basic, easy, intermediate, and complex, or advanced. Complex would be advanced. I consider basic and easy the beginners, and then obviously intermediate is intermediate, and then complex is advanced. And again, if you're a professional crocheter, I don't know if anybody here that's on here right now is a designer or a tech editor or anything like that, but I consider I consider designers and everybody who's in the industry in the advanced section, unless their skill level isn't quite up to this, what they say here. So let's talk about the basic and easy first. So basic and easy, first basic says projects using basic stitches may include basic increases and decreases. So basically with the beginners, it's knowing your chain, your slip stitch, your single, your half double, double, triple. Those are your basic stitches. And then maybe a crochet 2 together, double crochet 2 together, or increasing by doing 2 stitches in the same stitch, or some other basic way of increasing. I mean, there's a lot of ways of increasing and decreasing. Those are the basics. Everybody knows those. Okay. Juanita, you agree with me? Are you saying that people don't kind of put themselves in the right box, or what are you agreeing with me with? I'm not quite sure. I've said a lot, so that's why I'm asking. So easy, which I also consider beginner, is projects may include simple stitch patterns, color work, and or shaping. So with easy, what I'm thinking, you know, basically those 6 main stitches again, but then combining those stitches. So like a basic 5 double crochet shell, or actually the corner to corner Afghans, I consider those on the high end of the beginners, because they're really basic stitches. It's just using a little bit of an increase and a decrease that's different than normal, but there's still such a basic thing that I would consider those beginner patterns personally. With respect to advanced for designers and tech, yes, I agree. Yes, that is Most people do agree with that. Not everybody. A lot of people like to put the professionals in their own category, but I mean, I am a professional. I have been doing this for 22 years, almost 22 and a half now. And I am still learning. There's a lot of things out there that I never knew about or have just, you know, developed. Like my grandmother didn't know how to do magic ring. That's not something we did back then. That's something I learned. I did learn Tunisian or the Afghan stitch, but I didn't learn all the fancy stitches until I was older and I was already designing. So I can't say professional is its own category because we're still learning, regardless. And if we're not learning, we're not growing, right? So that's really important too. Okay, so let's go back to the easy patterns. So the 6 basic stitch patterns, simple combinations of stitches like the shell, a simple shell, maybe what I call the flower stitch is a simple stitch. It's half double crochet, single crochet in the same stitch, skip 1, half double crochet, single crochet in the stitch, and then when you do the next row, you're doing those 2 stitches in the single crochet and skipping over the half doubles. That's a very simple textured stitch. So I still consider that a beginner. And then color work. In this, I would say color work, just knowing how to change colors. And that's something beginners should all learn, whether it's they're changing colors at the end of the row or they're changing colors in the middle of the row. I would not call necessarily like Fair Isle crochet, like I do, where I'm making all the Fair Isle images, or there's the technique out there. I can't think of what it's called right now, but I know there's an organization that's doing all of the fallen military, their faces, and I want to say crochet by number, something like that, where every number is a different color, and it makes, you know, the photograph come alive in the crochet. I think that's what it's called, crochet by number. That's a more advanced. But when you're doing, you know, simple color changes, whether it's changing colors by row, or, you know, to do color blocking, or even changing color in the middle of a row to do just like maybe like a square that has a colored heart in the middle, and you're doing single crochets, and each row you increase the number of the heart stitches until you get the width of the heart, and then you're changing it up at the top to make the top of the heart that kind of bumps up. That would be what I call a basic color change type of thing. And or just changing yarn when one skein ends. Yeah, that's not a color change, but that's just knowing how to add new yarn to your fabric. So those are the kinds of things that I consider basic color changes. And then basic shaping, again, is using those simple increases and decreases, like the single crochet 2 together, or 2 double crochets in the same stitch to increase in the middle of your work, not just on the ends. Because a lot of people think, oh, I got to increase and decrease on the ends to make shaping. No, you can do it in the middle of your fabric. And that is what I consider basic shaping. There's a lot more complicated shaping than that. So, and even changing hook sizes to create an automatic decrease. So like if you're crocheting a sweater back, let's say, and you want waist shaping, so instead of increasing and decreasing at the waist, what a lot of people will do is if they start working with an H, they'll go down to a G or an F to automatically force the fabric, even though you're not changing the number of stitches, to get tighter, so you get the waist shaping, and then you go back to the larger hook. That I consider a basic shaping, because you're not changing anything. You're just using a different hook, and that makes things shape differently. So if you're doing any of those, that's still basic. So then, or beginner. Then when you get to intermediate, they say projects may include involved stitch patterns, color work, and or shaping. Okay, so this is where I think a lot of people get caught, because most stitch dictionaries at least the ones I have, and I don't have all of them out there in the world, but I have a lot of stitch dictionaries. And I would say most of those pattern stitches, no matter what they say here, are intermediate. If you can do those, you're definitely an intermediate crocheter, whether it's using chain loops to create lace spaces, if you're combining a bunch of stitches to make some sort of a texture, thicker, cushier fabrics, figuring out how to use different yarns to make the stitches do what you want them to do. You know, if you want something to, what we call stitch definition, where you want the color not to do anything, but the stitches themselves really stand out, figuring that out. And just being able to read a pattern and maybe even a chart and follow along. It doesn't matter. You're at least an intermediate, maybe even advanced at that point. So if you can read a pattern in a chart and understand what it's telling you, you might want to consider yourself an advanced crocheter too. Because with complex, or what I call advanced, projects may include complex stitch patterns, color work, shaping, using a variety of techniques and stitches simultaneously. So if you've done any of my lace patterns, I use a lot of simple stitches. But when it comes to my shawls, like the one that really comes to mind right now, as far as my shawls are concerned, is Violacious from A Garden Shawls. It's that one right there, my finger's on. Violacious is the purple shawl, and the field of the shawl has, I don't want to call it flight crochet because it's really not, but I have chain spaces in there that make flower shapes in the shawl itself. It's all double crochet, but there's chain spaces that make these little moving violets basically on the playing field. And then as you're working the rows, you're working from side to side. So the shawl, the width of the shawl is this way. You're working from side to side this way. So at the same time as you're making the main field of the fabric, you're also making the edging. And by combining all those stitches together and doing everything like that, that's what they consider advanced. So I think if you think you are an intermediate crocheter and can do that shawl actually has no repeats whatsoever in the entire pattern. We have 6 pages of charts just for that shawl, and that includes every single stitch in that shawl. I know a lot of people who consider themselves intermediate have done that shawl, and that's an advanced shawl. And if you follow the terminology that people are talking about, so you're combining a whole bunch of different things, you're not able to do a repeat, which means you have to pay attention. If you can do that, you're an advanced crocheter. And I'm almost positive that 40 to 45% of those people who said they're intermediate crocheters are really advanced. If you've ever completed a garment, you're an advanced crocheter. I have a really hard time making people feel like they are in one bucket. I don't want beginners to feel like, oh my gosh, I could never do this. I don't want an intermediate say, oh my gosh, that's too easy. I want to make my patterns be welcoming to everybody. So beginners feel like, oh, hey, I can do this. But yet advanced crocheters can say, oh, there's enough interest in here, I'll just keep going. You know, this is kind of fun. That's my goal with my patterns. I don't know if I achieved that in all cases. I mean, I know there's some people that are advanced crocheters who tell me they love my patterns because I do keep things interesting, even though I tend to use more simple stitches to make, you know, my patterns. But I also don't want to put people in boxes either, because I don't want people to be afraid to learn more. Like I said before, if we're not learning, we're not growing, and we want to keep growing. And I mean, I learn all the time. Anytime a new technique comes out, I buy the book, or at least read about it and see if it's something I want to learn. And if it's going to enhance my skill set as a designer, That's big for me. Yep, if you've ever completed a bullion stitch, no matter how sloppy it is, if you've completed it, you are an advanced crocheter. Agreed, Juanita. That's really important. So one of the things I wanted to tell you guys is going forward from now on, actually I've already started this, but I am going forward, my patterns are no longer going to be listing on them beginner, intermediate, advanced at all, because I don't want anybody to be afraid to try my patterns, because that's putting a label on you that you don't need. I mean, if you see a sweater design that I have done and you want to try it and make it for yourself, I want you to try. I want you to get on there and try. And then you all know, everybody who knows me knows that I'm here to support you. So if you're working on one of my sweaters, let's say you're doing the cardigan that's in modern Italian lace crochet. It's a very, very simple pattern. People don't think so because I use lace weight yarn, but it's really, really, really simple. But if you're struggling with it, send me an email. I have a contact page on my website for that reason. I always ask that you allow me a couple days to get back to you, because I do have other projects that I'm working on, things like that, but I will always get back to you. So I don't want you to be afraid to try any of my patterns. And what's really kind of cool too is a lot of times I'll have a customer who is working on one of my patterns and will say to me, hey, if you wrote it like this, I probably would have understood it. And that helps me evolve my patterns too, so that I know where, the people who are just starting out, what type of verbiage they need to be able to do what I'm doing. And then my advanced crocheters who are reading charts and only using charts, for certain things. I mean, with sweaters, you kind of have to use both because there's measurements and all that kind of stuff. But let's say my shawls, who only use the charts for my shawls, I can make things work for both sides of the equation. Let's see. Linda says, when I see a pattern I like, I read through to see if there's something I don't understand, and then I try to work through it. It often depends on who wrote the pattern. Yours are easy to understand. That's a good tip that Linda has there. One of the things I always tell my beginning crocheters when I teach beginners, I haven't taught a beginner's class in a while, but one of the things I always tell them is that don't be afraid to try something new. And when they're going through the patterns, read through it. I mean, that's the most important thing. Before you even start, read through it, make sure you have all the tools you need, you have enough yarn to do whatever it is you're making. And then I always tell everybody, look at the stitches. With the stitch patterns, what I recommend is that if the pattern gives you like a shell, I'm just going to use a simple shell, but if you've never done a shell before, make sure somewhere in the pattern, whether it's in the special stitches section or in the text of the pattern, it'll say, like skip 2 double crochets, 5 double crochets in the next double crochet, skip 2 double crochets, shell made kind of thing. So you can, if you see shell made or cluster made or, beginning cluster made or whatever, practice it before you start the project. Does that make sense? Practice the little pieces. And if something that has to fit somebody, or that you only have enough yarn to make this, you don't have enough yarn, you can't get the same dye lot, or this yarn is no longer made, and you just have enough gauge swatch. That's the other thing. And I really think that beginners should learn gauge right from the get-go. When I teach beginners, I always have a lesson in there on gauge and why gauge is important and how to do a basic gauge calculation. That's just important. I mean, when you get to more complicated stitches, you probably need a more complicated class on gauge. But when you're learning your basic stitches, your singles, your doubles, your triples, how to calculate your gauge. So that's really important. Okay, Juanita says, if you ever completed Bullion Stitch, yes, you are advanced. Linda said, having said that, I like to learn new things, which I have in the MCAL. Good. That's what that's the whole point of my doing the Mystery Crochet Alongs is because you're not seeing the project, you are kind of forced to learn a couple things, you know, whether it's a new stitch or a new way of increasing, or, you know, what you think is a traditional triangular shawl ends up being a really wide batwing type of shawl like I did this time because of the way I increased, things like that. So yeah, there you go. And now I'm curious, how do you do a bullion stitch? Bullions. You either love bullions or you hate bullions. And bullions are, you've probably seen them in, they use them a lot in freeform crochet, and then they're kind of a relief stitch that kind of sticks up on top of the fabric. Basically, you yarn over, you know, you could yarn over between 5 and I've seen bullions made with 20 yarn overs. And then you yarn over the last time and pull through all of those loops. And it makes this long wrapped stitch. And then you tack the other end down on your fabric somehow, depending on whether you're working in the round or a flat piece or whatever. I usually see bullions worked in the round on medallions and things like that. But the thing about bullion stitches is because you're not pulling loops up in between all those yarn overs, those wraps tend to get really tight. And when you yarn over and try to pull through 20, you know, even 5 loops without any extra space in between them, you're sitting there trying to fuss with it. It takes a lot of practice to get a bullion, your hook all the way through the bullion. And you need, in my opinion, I mean, I know there's a lot of crocheters who do bullions with a tapered hook where, I don't know if I have a hook here. Maybe this, okay. See, with the crochet hook, I don't know if that's gonna show enough here, but this section's flat and then it tapers into the bowl of the hook here. I don't know if you can see that, but most hooks do that. A good bullion stitch, a good bullion hook, all of this is the same length, and the same width all the way up. It just tapers at the very end. And this is not a good bullion hook because you need more space on the shaft here to get all those wraps on there. But if you've got everything nice and flat and even, when you pull that last loop through all those wraps, it's a little easier. It all depends on how well you wrap and then how well you, how loose they are. So I don't use bullions a lot. I haven't used bullions in years, actually, because they are frustrating sometimes for people, especially if you're a tight crocheter. And the key is making them, well, it depends, because you can make them curved. You know, you tighten them up so much and you pull through, they make like almost like a flower loop or a flower petal. But the technique that most people want is this nice flat wrapped thing. And those are hard to do right off the bat. I mean, it takes practice. The late Bonnie Pierce, she just passed away from cancer just a few weeks ago. She's a friend of mine. She was a friend of mine. I've known her since I became a designer, even before I started really designing through crochet groups. She has a book out on bullions. I want to say it's Annie's Attic, so you might not be able to get it. But check with Leisure Arts too, but look for Bonnie Pierce. She has a book on bullions, and then she's a freeform crochet designer who, just search for images of her work and you'll see bullions everywhere. Oh, Robin Chachula might have bullions in her work too. I haven't really looked to see all of her techniques. I do have one of her stitch dictionaries, and I can't remember if there's bullions in it or not. Knowing her, probably. But I haven't, because I don't use bullions very often. They're not something I really always look for. Yep, some Irish Crochet has been using bullions. There is. Yes, You can do heart shapes and different sizes of bullion stitches. Yeah. Oh, yes. Margaret Hubert's YouTube. I forgot about that. Thank you, Juanita. Look for Margaret Hubert on YouTube and her bullion. She does amazing bullions too. But Bonnie Pierce is the one who was known for her bullions. So, and she was a real treasure in the crochet world, and I'm really bummed we're not going to see more work from her. But I hope that anybody who's watching this, whether you're watching it live or you're watching it after the fact, check out Bonnie Pierce. Just Bonnie Pierce Crochet. Just type that into Google, and you should find all the stuff about her and her work and pictures and stuff like that. She was the bullion queen. But Margaret, yes, Margaret has really good video. So, so there you go with bullions. And so I just want you guys to realize that the whole reason I decided to do this is because I was really, you know, by reading some of the questions, I have 5 pages of answers from you guys, and I'm going to have to reprint this because I'm going blind trying to read this. But there's 5 pages of, you know, all the things that I asked you guys. I wish you know, more designers and bloggers and teachers would do this thing, you know, and when I'm reading these questions and reading the answers, it leads me to believe that people who are saying they're beginners really should put themselves in intermediate, and people who say they're intermediate should really put themselves in advanced. Because one of my beginners asked me, said, I wish more designers would design garments. You know, garments, I would not call any garment a beginner project. I would call that the first garment, even the most easy garment, I would call that, based on what the Crafty Art Council tells us about all the skill levels, is an intermediate. Because you have to shape for sleeves. You have to shape for a neckline. Doesn't matter if you're working, you know, from the top down or the bottom up. There's shaping involved, increasing, decreasing. Certain things are going to require increasing by adding chains on the ends, and then, you know, you have to consider that an intermediate technique. And I truly believe if a crocheter, a beginning crocheter, someone who, let's say, starts today with me, and I teach them the basic stitches over a month, and they start making scarves, and then they graduate to maybe fingerless mitts, and then maybe they graduate to a hat, and then maybe a baby blanket or a full-size blanket, and they start combining stitches to make texture or color changes or whatever. By the time they get to that blanket, I would say you're an intermediate. I would say if you're consistent on working on your crochet, even if it's just once or twice a week, within 6 months, you can consider yourself an intermediate crocheter as long as you continue to learn. If you're the crocheter who takes my beginning class, learns all your basic stitches, and then just cranks out scarves, then you're always going to be a beginner. But as soon as you start tackling, you know, working in the round, me is a step into maybe early intermediate crochet, because you're learning to work in the round. If you're making a flat hat that has no shaping, and then you sew it together, and then you cinch the top and put a pom-pom on, that's a beginner. So does that make sense, guys? I don't want you to underestimate yourselves. If you've been crocheting for more than a couple of years, you should put yourself in the intermediate box. I don't care if you only are able to crochet once a week. If you've been growing like that, you can't call yourself a beginner anymore. And I know that a lot of bloggers out there, they do some really great things with worsted weight and bulky yarns. But a lot of them, they call them great for beginners, and I would call them an advanced or an intermediate pattern because of the techniques that they're using. Cabled hats. Everybody's doing cabled hats right now, and they're doing it in bulky yarns and some worsted weight yarns. And the bigger the yarn that you're using makes it easier to do those stitches, in my opinion. because you can see the stitches, you can find the holes a lot easier than what I use, you know, fingering a lace weight and DK even. It's sometimes depending on the way the yarn's dyed and stuff like that, it might be a little harder to find those, but you're doing the same thing. So whether it's a bobbled hat or a cabled hat, bobbles and cables are intermediate and advanced. I mean, depending on how detailed the cable is. So I don't want you guys to think, oh, I'm doing so-and-so's hats, you know, I'm just walking through all of her hats. She calls them all beginners. I'm a beginner. I'm like, no, you're not. You are an intermediate at least. And if you're doing the complicated cables, you're advanced. So don't underestimate yourself. So again, my patterns going forward, you're going to see that I don't put a skill level on them anymore. I might say in the romance text when I'm marketing the patterns, I might say an easy to make or a good pattern for beginners, because even though there might be some texture stitches, like I would say that my Mr. Crochet Along this year, end of summer, is an intermediate pattern. But the way I wrote the pattern is I started with easy stitches at the first clue, and I got more complicated as we went along. The edging is the most complicated part of the entire pattern. And, but I think that a beginner who's been, excuse me, has been crocheting for at least a couple of months could pick up that shawl and start working that shawl if they did it in chunks of time and work the beginning and then go to the second stitch and then the third stitch and then the edging, and knowing that I'm in their back pocket, that they can come to my website and ask for help. I think that's really important for a beginner to be able to just pick up one of my patterns or any pattern in my opinion and do that. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. And one of the things too that kind of ties into this is that there were a lot of people saying that they want me to talk about, or all of us to talk about, what to do when they are looking at patterns that say they're easy, but they're not well written and you can't understand what they're doing. Obviously they weren't tech edited, or people didn't have it tested, or, you know, maybe even when they cut and pasted onto their blog, part of it didn't go and they didn't catch it. You know, because I always, if I do put a free pattern on my blog, which I don't do very often, but when I do, I always go through the entire pattern to make sure all the rows are there. And every pattern that I post from now on has either been tech edited or tested by somebody. So, well, everything's tech edited that you purchase from me. The ones that go on my blog have been tested at least, and most of them have been tech edited. So it's really hard for me as a designer to see someone come to my classes or send me an email and say, I got a pattern from so-and-so and I can't make heads or tails. I mean, I've had advanced crocheters who've been crocheting for 20, 30 years come to me and say, I got this pattern free off of XYZ website and I don't know what she's saying or what he's saying. And I'll go through it and I'm going, I don't know what they're saying either. There's a couple things you can do in that respect. And this kind of ties in, whether it's a beginner's pattern, intermediate pattern, advanced. I mean, a lot of us who are advanced crocheters are kind of set in our ways with how patterns are written and how stitches are put together. And we think that these newer up and coming designers need to get a clue with how patterns are written. And what I can say to that is that, yes, I mean, for consistency, I really feel our industry does need to standardize how patterns are written. However, there are people who learn as being the daughter of a teacher, the daughter-in-law of a teacher, and the mother of a teacher. I know people, and being a teacher myself, I guess, I know that people learn in different ways. Some people are auditory, some people are visual, some people need the words, and sometimes people need the words written differently than what a standard pattern is written. So that's why I always tell everybody, if you don't understand my pattern, you need to come to me and ask. And I wish other designers would do the same things. And now I know a lot of the bloggers have huge, huge followings because they offer all these free patterns. And I know a lot of people want the free pattern, but then they have trouble and they email the designer, and the designers don't always answer them because they have so many emails coming in from people because they have such big followings. They just kind of let customer service slip. And I know there's quite a few of them that do that. But what I'm going to say to you is that if you cannot get a hold of any designer who has a pattern out there, if it's in a magazine, you always contact the magazine first, because a lot of times magazines have their own customer service to help with technical issues. But if you can't get a hold of the magazine, you can't get a hold of the designer, if you have a trusted designer that you want to go to, or a teacher that, you know, whether you've learned at Michael's or you've learned in a yarn shop or you've learned online, and that teacher has said, you know, contact me with your questions. I'm one of those teachers. I'm one of those designers. Contact me. Just say, hey, I've got this pattern. If it's a free pattern, give me the link so that I can get my own copy. If not, what I'll do is jump on Zoom, or I'll just say, hey, can you give me just a little synopsis? I don't want any copyright violations, but just give me if it's like, it says this, 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 and this, and I can't figure it out, then I'll go buy the pattern if I need to help you. If it's not a real inexpensive pattern. But, you know, or if you're local to me, we can meet up for coffee, and I can sit down with you with the pattern and go through it. I do this with all my students when I was teaching locally over on the west side of the state. I don't mind helping. And if the pattern is not written well and I can't figure it out, I'll do what my grandmother and I used to do, and I'll reverse engineer that part of the pattern with you through the pictures, if there's good pictures. If there's not good pictures, at that point, I don't know what I can do for you. You'd have to go and just keep hounding that designer. I'm firm believer of having patterns tech edited and more eyes on the patterns before I release them. So I have very, very few customers who come back and find errors. You'll notice my errata page hardly has any errors, because either my people don't report the errors because it's something so small that they can just, you know, might be a typo, and they know it's a typo, and they'll fix it themselves. Oh, excuse me, guys. I got to get more coffee here. Okay, I'm talking a lot. So, you know, a lot of times people just won't report them, but when they do report them, I always go back through and I verify, first of all, that they have an error, and I will put it up on my errata page. I have one of my customers is also a tech editor, and she'll come back to me and she'll say, Karen, you've got the wrong number here, or you missed a word here and it makes no sense. And I will put all those things on my errata page. So, and if there's something big, like there is a pattern I did for a book several years ago. Yes, Juanita, you're right. The pictures do help with them sometimes too. And I know a lot of people won't report an error to a designer because they're afraid of offending us. And I'm one of those people who, unless you have read it wrong, and I will have to, you know, I'll gently tell you, okay, you're reading this wrong. This is what I mean. And then that's usually when I get, okay, if you would have written it this way, I might have understood it better. And that, I always keep those things in the back of my head. But if you find a blatant error in my pattern, I want to know about it, because I need to correct it for everybody. And I don't want anybody out there to buy, you know, a $7 pattern and say, oh, Karen's patterns aren't worth the money because she's got all these errors. And, you know, and sometimes people will say, oh, all of her patterns are error ridden, and they find just one error somewhere. So that's really important. Let's see here. Years ago, a gal at work taught me the names of stitches I knew how to do, but I didn't know the names. I figured I could make anything, so I made a cute little cardigan, and then one for my aunt. There you go. See, there's no reason why you can't can't do things. I mean, it boggles my mind how scared people are, and it's just yarn, guys. It's just yarn. Just try. I mean, the worst you have to do is rip everything out and start again. And honestly, that's learning. If you don't learn, you don't grow. So there you go. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten patterns with mistakes in them. The numbers didn't work out. I had to sit down and practically write the pattern. And that frustrates me too. I understand that, Linda. It's one of those things that, oh, it drives me crazy. When I was teaching beginners at my local yarn shop years ago, I had this one customer that would come in almost every week. In fact, we ended up having standing lessons every week because she was here, it was there every week. And she would pick the cutest patterns. I mean, she liked to do blankets, and she'd like to do amigurumi style stuffed animals kinds of things. And she'd always get them free, either off of Ravelry or off the blogger's website. And they always had errors. And I can't tell you, we'd have an hour of lesson and I would spend probably 25, 30 minutes rewriting a pattern so that she could actually do it. And I just don't understand. I mean, if you're going to put something out there, have some respect for your knowledge, have pride in your work. And that's what I hope I do with my patterns. I hope you see the pride that goes into them, that I want to proudly present this pattern to you. I am far from perfect. My tech editors will tell you, especially when it comes to the math of when I'm increasing, I might be working on 2 projects at the same time. And one shawl, I might be increasing 4 stitches every row, and another shawl, I may be increasing 8 stitches, just like the Mystery Crochet Along, and I'll confuse them when I'm doing the math. I'll forget which shawl I'm working on, and I'll start, and then I'll just go back and I'll go, okay, and then add 8, and then add 8, and then it should have been, I'll add 4, I add 4. So there you go. I am far from perfect. And I tend to type fast, so a lot of my words, common words, will have a letter missing or something. So my tech editors catch a lot. You would be surprised how much they catch. But they do tell me that I tend to have my patterns as perfect as I can before I hand them off to them. And usually the way I write a pattern is I write the pattern, or I design it and I write it at the same time. And then I go back with a sample and I go through row by row and make sure that my stitches are the right way, way, the order that they're supposed to be in, and where the increases are in the right places. My asterisks are in the right places and things like that. I usually start with the stitch counts at the beginning, and then I'll just figure out if I'm increasing like a shawl, I'll just figure out the stitch counts after, so that I know where my increases and, what my numbers are when I have to do stitch counts like that. And then I let it sit for like 2 or 3 days, maybe a week. And then I'll go back through it one more time before I send it to my tech editors. That's how I work my patterns. I know a lot of people will write the pattern, send it to the tech editor, and the tech editor has to do a lot. When I'm grading patterns for like shawls, or not shawls, for sweaters and garments and things, I have spreadsheets, but my spreadsheets aren't always necessarily totally on target. So I'll go back through those numbers as well. And if it's something that's really crazy, like, I'm trying to think, there's one sweater pattern that I did. I can't remember what book it was. But there's one sweater pattern that no matter what I did, the grading just was so far off. I mean, I would have sleeves on the 5X that were probably, 24 inches too long. So I'll ask my tech editors to, can you do the grading on this? And then I'll go back through their grading and see if the measurements come out the way I want them to. So it's a team effort with all my patterns. And that's why my patterns are so expensive compared to other designers. There is going to be a point where I'm going to probably drop the cost of some of my patterns. I'm not sure when that'll be or if it's going to happen, but I base my pricing on different things. And there's one key piece of my pattern designing that is actually the price has dropped. So I might be able to adjust the cost of my patterns a little bit. So there you go. just a little possibility out there. When I was young, our next door neighbor was a knit and crochet teacher. I was knitting a vest and came out to Gauge, but the vest was giant. I took it to her and she said the pattern was, oh, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, especially from patterns in like the 80s. I didn't really start teaching classes until the late 90s, but people will come in with like old Annie's Attic magazines and garments, and oh my gosh, I can't tell you, the pattern was wrong. It made me feel great that it wasn't my fault. So I gave it to a very large-busted lady and custom made for her. There you go. So, you know, that's making lemonade out of lemons. Sometimes, you know, it's a happy accident. Now I'm sounding like Bob Ross, but, you know, the happy accidents that happen that, you know, I've done that with sweaters too. When I first learned to knit, I did a show in Oakland, California, which is near where my parents live and where I grew up. And my mom actually came to the show with me one day because I had the day off, and she wanted to walk the market and see the people I knew and what I do, because she had never really seen me teach. And even though I wasn't teaching that day, she wanted to see what it is I did. So while we are happy little crochet hooks, there you go. So we were walking the market and she found this beautiful, oh my gosh, beautiful mohair. And she said, oh, I'd love a sweater in this. And I had just been learning to knit. And so I knew that I could go to the shop that I was learning from if I bought the yarn, and she wanted a cardigan. And so we bought the yarn and I had the pattern. And so I had enough yarn and I did my gauge swatch. And it turned out beautifully. And the gal at the shop kept saying, this is good, this is good, this is going to be a great cardigan. It was a mohair blend, so it wasn't a real stretchy yarn. I mean, it had memory in it. It had some sort of wool in it. I can't even remember what the yarn exactly was. I just remember the mohair because I remember how fuzzy it was. And then when I knit the pattern, it came out so big. I brought it to the shop and I went, this would fit, you know, an elephant. It's huge. And they went through the pattern with me. And sure enough, the way they were increasing was making it way too big for the size that I was supposed to be crocheting for. So we had to, eventually she helped me figure out where the problem started. And we had to rip back in mohair. If anybody's worked with mohair, you know how hard it is to rip back mohair and then reknit it. And my mom's, as far as I know, my mom still has that sweater. I haven't seen her wear it in a while. She's in California, so it doesn't get that cold very often. So I don't think she wears it all that often. And right now she's like heats up all the time. So I don't know when the last time she wore it was, but I have one of those experiences too. And that's where I think it's things like that that have really made me realize what the importance of having patterns tested and tech edited and things like that over the years. And I've changed the way I've done it over the years. Now I tech edit and test everything. My testers just now finished 6 patterns that are going to be in a book being released next year. It's going to be an ebook. So I'm working on a few things for the new year. Oh, I should show you. I've been doing a little swatching. I think last week or the week before I showed you the skeiny yarn from Emma's Yarn that I was saying I'm going to make a hat. I think I found my stitch. So this is really cushy. And I'm using an H hook with DK weight, and it's got enough. Look at the stretch. This is about 6-7 inches before I stretch it, and it stretches really well. So so I think this is going to be my next project. I just have to finish the swatch a little bit. I have to make the swatch a little taller so I can do an accurate gauge measurement before I start the pattern. But this is going to be a hat. So you'll see that coming out sometime next year. Yeah, and gauge swatches are huge. So for me, I gauge swatch everything these days. And I also, I can't stress the importance of gauge. And no matter if you're a beginner or an advanced crocheter, cannot stress how important gauge can be when it's something that has to fit, like fit a head or a garment or something like that. So I have done quite a bit of talking today. I have been on my soapbox with pattern skill levels. So does anybody have any questions for me or any comments about what I talked about today? It was one of those things that was just nagging me as I was going through this and saying, why do people realize that they are more skilled than they think they are? So, and I don't want anybody to put themselves in a box. I want you to think that, hey, I can do this. Or, you know, there's too many people out there that say, no, I'm not good enough. And I just, that just infuriates me to no end, because if I can crochet and I can become a designer, anybody can do it. So it's so important to me that you guys feel good about what you're doing as a crocheter. So does anybody have any questions for me? I'm going to take some coffee here. Just go. I shouldn't have stickers made. Just go for it. It's only yarn. Or just make it, oh, it's only yarn. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Because you never know. I mean, if you don't try, you never know what it is that you can do. And there's so many people who are afraid to try. And it saddens me. So I hope that I've brought some encouragement to some of you. Yep. That is, I mean, it's just yarn. I mean, even if you're buying really high-end yarn, you can rip it out, you can soak it and straighten it all out and start all over again. I mean, that's really a big thing. Thanks, Juanita. I'm glad you enjoyed the chat. Linda says, I practice new stitches on leftover yarn. Yep, that's another thing you can do too. So when you get to the good stuff, you know what you're doing. It's the starting that's the problem. Aria, is that how you say your name, Aria? What's the starting? When you say starting, is it like working into the chains? Is it like understanding what to do? Tell me what you mean by that. I mean, I know a lot of people struggle with starting chains and working into the chain itself. I'm actually going to be offering a class next year on my course platform on how to do foundation stitches and all sorts of different foundation stitches, so that you can, you know, avoid working in the chain. Oh, just starting to create something. Are you saying without a pattern? Or are you saying with a pattern, you just starting to create? Are you thinking like me as a designer, I have something in my head and I can translate it to my hands? Or is it like you buy one of my patterns and you don't know where to start? Oh, okay. So you're thinking you have this idea in your head and you want to translate it to your hands. Okay. So you just have to try. I mean, if it's, let's say you have a hat pattern and you've got a stitch pattern that you want to use to make this hat, and you've never seen a hat like this before, and you can't find a pattern for it, and you want to make this hat with this particular stitch. The easiest thing to do is figure out, first of all, if you want to go start from the top of the head to the bottom, or if you want to start from the bottom to the top. Now, the way I would do it is I would start from the bottom up and then look and see, and then you could translate it the opposite direction. But literally all you have to do is you start with a gauge swatch. When you're designing something, you have to do a gauge swatch. So what I usually do is I crochet whatever stitch pattern I want to use in a 6x6 square. In this particular stitch that I'm using here for my hat, I'm going to do a smaller one because I know what my own gauge is like. So I know that instead of going all the way to 6 inches, I can go up to 3 or 4 inches and I'll have pretty good gauge. And that's just from 22 years of experience of doing this. Oh, just getting the idea too. Let me just tell you about what I'm talking about first. So you get your gauge swatch. So if you're making a hat, usually an adult size hat is somewhere between 21 and 20 or 20 and 21 inches around. So you figure out how many stitches you need to get to 20 to 21 stitches around. And then you just start working that swatch to however long you want the hat. And then you can, if you want to decrease, you can. If you're just starting out, what I recommend is just make a tube and then cinch it at the top and put a pom-pom or something on top, just like that. With the brim, I always add my brims later. I don't start with the brim and then work up. I always add the brim later, because a lot of times what happens to me is when I'm working the textured stitches up, the brim I originally wanted to start with is not going to look good with what I just did. So I'll change the brim later. But there you go. But ideas for me, I mean, every person who designs is different. Oh, I thought somebody was knocking on my door. Everybody who designs is different. For me, it can be yarn. I can look at a skein of yarn like this yarn here. When I looked at it, I knew right away, especially after I wound it, this needed to be a hat. It has the squish factor. It has the colors, the way the colors are dyed in this. I mean, and I had several different types of patterns in my head of what I could do. I could do cables. I could do just a plain squishy hat. I could do, I could try to do plan pulling with that, but after doing a couple swatches, I realized that the length of the color are different. So sometimes it's the yarn. Sometimes you just look at the yarn and it tells you what it wants to be. A lot of times too, like a couple or about a month ago or more, I did a box opening of yarns from Knitting Fever. They sent me a whole bunch of yarns to try out. And as I was opening them up, I had all these ideas. Okay, this one could be a cool skirt, and this one could be whatever. But then as they sit on my shelf, because I have those yarns sitting forward, because I'm going to be swatching a lot of those. I've already started swatching some of them, but I'm going to be swatching those. The ideas are changing because of what I'm doing now. Different ideas will come. Sometimes I have an Afghan I designed years ago, probably when I was like 2 or 3 years into being a designer. And the idea for that blanket came from a tie-dyed t-shirt. Sometimes colors in nature will give me an idea for a sweater. Or I'll be looking through a stitch dictionary of stitches and I'll see a stitch and go, oh, that would make a cool sweater. Or, oh, that would be awesome as an edging on a shawl. Or sometimes I work with local yarn shops and they ask me to do a project for like I work a lot with Stilly River. I did the last few years. I did her yarn crawl patterns, and every year she would say, okay, I want to do a theme for my pattern. So this year it's this theme. So I know what her theme is, and she says, and I want to use this yarn. So go with it. So like last year was cables. She wanted to use cables. So I came up with a cabled hat. You can go to my website and see it. It's called Cadence. I still have the slide on the front page of my website. So there's all different ways. I mean, color, like I said, colors in nature. I see somebody's sweater at the store or at church or something, and it might be knitted, but I'll go, oh, I can do that at crochet. My Fair Isle patterns and my sock patterns all came from knitted garments that I've seen, or knitted socks. I mean, the whole reason why I started crocheting socks way back in the early 2000s was because I was determined to take my grandmother's knit sock pattern and make it work in crochet. And that's where all my sock patterns come from. So there's so many different ways. I mean, it's just if you're really thinking about becoming a designer, get in touch with me on my website. Go to KarenHooley.com and go to my contact form and tell me that you had asked about this on my chat today, on my podcast. And I am glad to chat with you about getting started, how to start designing, that kind of thing. getting ideas. One of the things I always tell people too is that if you really want to start designing, the best thing you can do is grab a stitch dictionary, and every day or at least 3 times a week, just go through the book. Start with one stitch pattern, make a swatch. Go to the next stitch pattern, make a swatch with different yarns, you know, and use all weights. I mean, use lace weight, use worsted weight, use bulky, use DK, use fingering, and, you know, maybe, you know, plan 2 to 3 days a week. Oh, Kelly. Okay. Kelly, you contact me because, yeah, we can talk about this. If this is something you'd like to do. So I'm glad to help new designers. That's, you know, if everybody is successful, we're all, you know, if someone's successful, we're all successful. So don't be afraid to ask me questions. Definitely. I'd love to help new designers. So, but one of the things is, you know, by making the stitches in a stitch dictionary, the ideas start to flow, or at least you can see what the stitches do in different yarns. So if that helps, that's great. Awesome. Okay. You're welcome. I'm glad to help. I'm a little past 10 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off. But you guys, honestly, and that invitation's open to anybody. If you're interested in becoming a designer, or want to teach classes, or, you know, just want to design for yourself and don't know where to get started, you know, like you want to make yourself a sweater and you have this idea and you don't know where to start. That's what I'm here for. I mean, I design patterns, I write books, and I teach classes, but I'm also here to help. So don't be afraid to come talk to me about it. Again, you know, I've got things going on in my life right now, but so give me a couple days to get back to you, but definitely contact me. One of the things I have been talking about for a lot of years, and I think this might be the year I start on it, is to do a whole series on becoming a designer, becoming a teacher, what it takes, how to deal with the accounting, how to deal with all that, you know, either one big book or multiple books in a series or live events. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it yet, but honestly, there's so many people out there who are interested in what it takes. And I've been doing this. I mean, I'm one of the designers who's kind of lasted through the years. I'm going on 22 and a half years. So if you're really interested in this and want to be able to make a go of it, let me know and we can do it. So I'm going to hang out, or I'm not going to hang out. I'm going to go. And so you guys have a great week. If you're watching this after the fact, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you know the next time I go live. And if you have any questions for me, make sure you hit me up at KarenHooley.com and just go to my contact form and let me know what your questions are. I'm glad to help. So have a great week, everybody. I'll see you next time. And I hope you guys have a great rest of October, because next time it'll be November, and I can't believe we're already in November. See you later.